Hello there, David Taylor or Mr. Pelargonium back with another video for the Pelargonium and Geranium Society. Well, today I'm actually going to talk all about composts. I've actually begun a trial of different types of compost, different types of mixes, and various things to do with the compost that we use in our pots and containers to grow our pelargoniums in this case, of course. So let's get going and have a look. Well, hello there, welcome back to the channel. It's good to see you again. So today I'm actually going to talk about a trial. I'm going to start doing a trial about compost. I think I did mention this probably over 2 or 3 years ago actually. I mean, in the UK, the government have legislated that they're going to stop the sale and use of peat-based composts. In the UK, retail-wise, peat-based composts retail for the ordinary grower are going to be banned, I think, from next year, and in the nursery trade they're going to be banned from, I think, is 2030. So what I'm doing, I'm going to trial some of the composts that are currently available retail-wise in the UK. Now, I do have to say that I haven't got a clue what the availability of peat-based compost may be around the world. I think in Europe they've got a very similar scenario where they're banning peat-based composts. But the majority of sort of commercial nurseries are moving away from using peat-based compost primarily because they've not got much choice, to be honest. So, you know, most retail plants that are sold in garden centres and the like now are being sold, grown in either a peat-free or a peat-reduced compost. So I'm basically going to be doing a trial using sort of completely peat-free composts and using my old peat-based compost, which I can still get, but you can really only get from wholesalers now, as well as 2 of the what we call the John Innes formulations. One is peat-free and one has still got a proportion of peat in it. Now, John Innes is a compost formulation which was formulated many decades ago, I think by the John Innes Institute or John Innes Foundation. And they produced a formulation of mixes for sort of basically seed sowing and germinating of young plants. Slightly bigger plants, sort of the next stage, if you like, potting on plants into small pots. And then another formulation for much more mature plants. And these were given basically a number. The seedling one was John Innes 1. For growing on, potting on, slightly, you know, bigger plants, say I suppose about this sort of size realistically. A formulation number 2, and for mature plants in bigger pots, bigger containers, a John Innes number 3. And they were made up of slightly different formulations using a loam mix, bit of peat, and a little bit of sand and things like that, just to sort of bulk it up. Now, there are currently available peat-free versions of John Innes, and I can only assume, I haven't done any research in this, that the John Innes Institute have given permission to use a peat replacement. So that's all I can go by. I'm not doing any science on it myself. Right, now at this point, I should probably say that over the years, over the many decades that I've been growing pelargoniums seriously, I probably used every type of different formulation of compost that you could possibly imagine. I've mixed John Innes with peat-based composts and different types of formulations with grit, sand, perlite. I've used topsoil with peat. I've used and formulations with that, perlite and sand and grit in between those. All mixed up, every sort of proportion of this and proportion of that you could possibly imagine. I think in the vast majority of circumstances, it's how you manage your plants with particular regard to liquid feeding, positioning of them, how often you water, how much you water, and all those kinds of issues to do with the actual management of the plant, which I think is probably the most important aspect of growing pelargoniums. Right, so down here I've got the 4 composts that I'm going to be trialling. Now the first one here, this is completely peat free. This is what is known as Melcourt, well, there's the production company, Melcourt Silver Grow. This is the multi-purpose. This is the one that a lot of professional nurseries are using or going over to. It's completely peat free. It's made of coir, cut up wood chippings, and that kind of thing. It's got a really quite nice light formulation. It's probably, in terms of being compared to a peat-based compost, is probably the one that is almost identical. Now, there are others available that almost, to be quite honest, look like grass clippings, and I am not intending to use those. I am going to spare my plants that. I mean, I'm obviously a serious grower, so I only want to try and use something, of good quality as possible. Now, what I'm going to do with this Silver Grow, I will add a proportion of sand to it and a proportion of perlite. Basically a 6-1-1 mix. So 6 parts of this with 1 part of sharp horticultural sand and 1 part of perlite. The reason I do that, it just opens it up a bit and gives, it gives good drainage to it. This is Humax Original. This is the main potting compost that I use or have always historically used. It's becoming more difficult to get hold of. This is a pure peat-based compost. It does have a proportion of silver sand in it already. And I add 5 parts of that to 1 part of perlite as my sort of basic standard mix. That's the one that I've been using for quite a number of years, and I find it superb. So going over to 2 John Innes type, and this is Levington's peat-free John Innes. Now I have to say I've been working with this and I haven't found it very good at all, mainly because the loam constituent is very globular and you have to really try and break it down. There's the loam constituent in this John Innes number 2 mixture. I use the number 2 because that's obviously good for potting on into sort of medium-sized pots. But the loam constituent of this is really hard and really, there it is. I'm just breaking that out. That's the loam constituent, but it's very globular and it doesn't mix very well into the other component parts of it. This is obviously using a peat-free constituent in place of the peat. Now I don't know what that may be made up of. There's obviously bits of little chippings in here and the like. It's not been very well sort of broken down, I would say, and this is why I'm not a fan of some of these peat-free composts that are basically nothing more than, seemingly to me, grass clippings. You can see very different in the Silver Grow here, which is clearly just sort of lovely dark coir and really scrunched down little wood clippings. A very good medium. I use, now with both of these John Innes, this one here, we'll just talk about in a moment, that's still a peat-based John Innes. I mix basically 2 parts of this to 1 part of perlite, primarily because the loam makes it relatively heavy and I don't like a heavy compost. I like a really open, light compost. So I mix basically 2 parts of the John Innes type to 1 part of perlite. So that's the peat-free version, and this is a Westlands peat-based one still. You can still get hold of this retail-wise. This is really quite nice and soft. It's got really good mix of the peat and the loam. It's really open. When you mix that with the perlite, it produces a nice sort of relatively fine mix. I mean, even in these peat-based ones, there will be a little constituent of other bits and pieces, because there's a little bit of wood fibre, solid wood fibre, which I will just chuck out in this case, mixed up with it, because they've had to do that in the years that we've now been starting to reduce the use of peat. But I particularly like this Westlands compost. So there we are, that's the 4 that I'm trialling. So the obvious question really is why I use different formulations. What I actually use the John Innes mix for is for the slightly tougher growing plants, such as uniques, scentids, regals to a certain extent as well. They like a little bit more of a loam-based compost. They like to get their roots in something a bit tougher, I've found over the years, and I think it's generally known. Zonals like to have a slightly freer root run, so they prefer a softer compost. So in this instance, the Silver Grow Peat Free or the Humac. But I do sometimes mix and match them, so that's not exhaustive, but that's generally the way that I do it. So that's really it. It's just giving you, all I'll do is report back what I've got. All of my plants that I've repotted, potted on, etc., have all got separate labels in now, or an additional label I should say. There we are, there's one that's been repotted, and it's got a label telling me what the compost is that I'm using. In this case, it's the peat-free John Innes mix. Seems to be quite happy at the moment, doesn't it, obviously? But obviously they're going to need a little bit of time, aren't they, to sort of grow on. And we'll just see how it goes, how they compare. But it's something that we're probably almost certainly going to have to get used to. So I think this little trial will be able to provide you, hopefully, with a little bit of information. So that's just about it from me today. I'm going to go and film another video now. I'll probably have a bit of lunch first. And I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.